So tracking progress on SDGs is complicated. It's complicated because, well, I started with the 17 goals, very broad, very encompassing, 169 targets. The interagency expert group came up with a list of 232 indicators, but what they call indicators can many times mean actually a very broad range of data series. And then in the UN Global Database on SDGs, which is available online, you'll find over 1,000 data series, which are then include also disaggregations, time series, there's alternative indicators, there's indexes, so it's a very messy and complicated data environment in which to understand how countries are doing. What we've done in order to help countries navigate that complicated system is our study on measuring distance, which requires a set methodology. So the methodology starts with selecting indicators. We then have to set levels for targets and then normalize the values in order to use a unifying metric to help compare between indicators. So how did we do that? Selecting indicators, we were actually asked by our member countries to stay as close as possible to the global list of indicators that was decided on by the interagency expert group, and that is in order not to present an additional layer of interpretation to the SDGs. So from that, what the UNIAG list, we use data from the UN database. We use OECD data where we have better comparable data for OECD countries, and we use UN data when there's no OECD sources. This gives us a total of about 130 indicators covering 105 targets. These are the numbers that we're actually computing right now for the 2019 update, so it'll probably be slightly different, but this is the kind of ballpark figures. But the availability really matters, the data availability really matters when you're trying to understand the overall picture of SDGs. So this again is taken from our update, which will be published next year. So the figures might change slightly, but altogether you can see that across goals, this is across the 17 goals, there's a very different level of data availability for each of the goals. This is just looking at, for each target, is there at least one indicator to measure that target? So a lot of times there's more than one indicator necessary according to the global list, but at least one indicator, and then how many, in each goal, how many targets are covered by at least one indicator. And you can see that for goal 17 on partnerships, the goal on cities, on inequality, on oceans, on sustainable production, we're looking at less than, between 30 and 50% data coverage. Whereas for other indicators, we have more. So for infrastructure, we have a complete set of indicators. For health, we have a complete set of indicators, but that is without any judgment on those indicators themselves and how useful they are in actually giving us a picture. So for example, on goal 9 on infrastructure, we have quite a few indicators where we have a difficulty in identifying the target, the necessary target. So we have the indicators, but we don't know what we're aiming to achieve by 2030. And I'll show you what that means in a moment. So how do we set, after choosing the indicators using both the UN Global Database and the OECD data available, we have to set the targets. So how did we set the targets in our study? We used 3 sources of targets. So first, the easy one is when there's an explicit target in the agenda. So for example, the agenda actually stipulates what the level of official development assistance should be, which is 0.7% of GNI, of global national product. And then when we don't have an explicit target, we use what we call the implicit target, which is what has been agreed in international agreements or norms, what the experts say should be. So for example, for the air pollution goal, we use the WHO recommendation on PM 2.5. And when we have neither explicit nor implicit, we use the best OECD performance. So we take the top 10th percentile, that's usually the third best performing country. So for example, for reducing, increasing recycling of waste, we take what is currently the third best performing country, which gives us 56% as a target to go for. And then what we've done, what we're doing in this update is we're also we've also identified several indicators that have no normative direction. So what do we mean no normative direction? We don't know whether an improvement means going up or down. So for example, on goal 9, on infrastructure, which I pointed out before, we have quite a lot of indicators that are related to share of GDP. Okay, so share, for example, manufacturing as a share of GDP, labor share of GDP, small and medium businesses as a share of GDP. Now, you could say for each one of those, everybody wants to increase their share of GDP, but if everybody increases, somebody's going to have to decrease, so we can't actually use it as a target for this methodology. And we just present the figures as is without doing any, without actually measuring distance to target. So normalizing distances to target, what we use in our study is it's kind of a modified Z-score using the standard deviation in order to measure the distance from the target. So if the green line here is the target to be achieved, and the dots are the spread of countries according to their performance, and the blue dot is country X. So how many standard deviations away is country X from achieving the target? What does this give us? This is the visualization of results, and this is again extracted from the 2019 update. So it should be. This isn't the final. Result, but it kind of gives you a picture. So what we do is we look at the bars. This presents the performance at goal level for OECD average, and the higher the bar is, the closer you are to achieving the target. So at the top you see the 0 line, so that means you're 0 standard deviations away from achieving the target. And we've cut the graph here at 3 because most OECD countries are on average at least 3 standard deviations away or less from achieving most of the targets. And in order to visualize the importance of the data gaps, what we're doing in this edition, and this will look different from what you can find online, which is the 2017 edition. We're using this representation of the striped bars in order to show how much data we're missing. So, for example, if you take implementation, the implementation goal, this is how far you are based on available data. But if you were to, but this is the penalty, so-called, for data which isn't available. So you could actually be this far away from achieving the goals. We also visualized these results at the target level, and this is taken from the 2017 edition. And it shows how countries are doing on each one of the targets, and again using the 0 to 3 scale. So the outer line is 0. So if you've reached the outer line, then you've achieved the target, and it starts at 3, which is 3 standard deviations away from achieving the target. Now, what does this show us in terms of how OECD countries are doing overall? I'll just go back to show you at the goal level. It's a bit easier to visualize. But you can see that we have relatively good performance on climate, on oceans, on cities, and on implementation. performance isn't so good for OECD countries on gender equality, on the inequality goal, on institutions, that's the goal 16. But again, you have to take into consideration these considerable data gaps. So while the goals relating to planet look as if they're quite close to being achieved, we actually see that there's a lot of data gaps to fill there. What are we doing next for our study? So again, we're publishing an update in 2019. It's going to show the same kind of results, but it's also going to look at a few different issues. So we're taking a look at going dynamic. We're taking a look, well, the results I've showed you up until now have been a static point in time. We're also going to be looking at trends, so how countries have been doing in the past. Are they moving in the right direction in order to achieve targets? We're looking at transboundary aspects, so how much of the agenda actually means, how much do countries have to take into account when implementing the transboundary nature of the Sustainable Development Goals? We also look at disaggregation. We've recently published a working paper on looking at children and youth. So how are children and youth performing on SDGs, or how well are we doing on achieving SDGs for children and youth? And as I said, again, we'll be updating next year. And this is kind of just to give you a sense of what the disaggregation looks like. This is the same wheel, the same visualization, but for the data available for children and young people. So this has already been published, and we're also working on doing the same kind of analysis for gender. So as I'm sure you know, one of the essential points of the Sustainable Development Goals, or one of the main themes, is that leave no one behind. So how different groups in the population do on each one of the targets is very important to understand. I'll leave you with that, and thank you very much.